When it comes to Team Ninja, I enjoy many of their games. I have had a blast with their Dead or Alive series since I was a kid. They are silly, over the top, and very fun fighting games. Their Ninja Gaiden games were awesome as well, and I miss more stuff like that nowadays. Nioh was a compelling take on the Souls formula, as it added in a loot grind element that provided hours of content to enjoy. So when I saw the first trailer for Stranger of Paradise, I was excited that this was being made by this company, but I couldn't really get a good read on the game itself. I have been playing the mainline Final Fantasy games and their spin-offs for years, but Stranger of Paradise had an odd marketing approach. It showed how the game was probably going to have some of that cheesy delivery that I would come to expect from this series, along with some odd choices like the use of licensed music where I normally would expect some new original scores. I couldn't get a good read on the gameplay as well. It looked like it was more inspired by the Souls series, but at the same time, something different. I do think that Square Enix could have done a better job at marketing this game, as that was probably its greatest failure. Because once I was able to really dive into this title, I found a lot here to enjoy. The use of Frank Sinatra was an odd choice for a Final Fantasy title, and it is seen here in the tutorial section. And I will admit that by the time the credits rolled on the story, the song choice fit in perfectly with the narrative. I ended up enjoying the story and especially Jack along with some of the other cast members as well, but there were definitely spots where the storytelling could have benefited from being less convoluted. On the gameplay side of things, there's so much to enjoy with this title. Loads of classes to experiment with, an enjoyable loot grind, a combat system that is satisfying and leans a bit more into the action side of things. I love my time with this, and I'm still playing it now. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you my review for Stranger of Paradise. Let's start out with the combat system. From the trailers, I felt like maybe this was potentially going to be more of a Souls title, and play just like it, but then there are other elements that made it seem more like the recent run of mainline Final Fantasy titles with a focus on action. Stranger of Paradise does in fact have some elements of Souls games, especially with the use of a stamina bar and even some similar button mapping. But when it comes down to the mechanics and how they are used, it is way more of a Final Fantasy action title than a Souls game. You have a main attack and a special move button. The interesting about the special moves is how you can personalize them and change them up depending on what you're going for with a class. For example, you can perform a different special move if you are just idle, or a new one after performing one basic attack, or a different one after performing two basic attacks in a row. This allows the player to tweak their moveset in a way that fits the flow of the player and how they want their moves to work, meaning you can choose to pull off a leaping attack after doing one hit, or perform a shield bash after doing two, or vice versa. It is a nice simple option that allows players to have some more control over the action and how their character operates. Now when it comes to dealing damage, your lifeblood comes from your MP bars. These allow you to perform all of your special attacks, so while in a fight you're always trying to find ways to refill your bars to put you in the best position to defeat your enemies.
Be ready for anything. Make this entertaining.
Now it might seem obvious that you are trying to drain your enemies' health bars, but what you're really trying to pay attention to are their break gauge. As you use your main attacks and more importantly your special moves, you will take out chunks out of their gauge. Once broken, this will put them into a stunned state where you can perform a takedown on them. For basic enemies, this will kill them outright, and for bosses it completely cuts one of their phases short. So while in combat you're trying to figure out what your enemies are weak against, as that will greatly take more out of their gauge, along with taking advantage of your environment. One neat effect is if your special move has any push to its attack, and you end up hitting an enemy into a wall. This will take off more from their break gauge, so sometimes finding a better position can greatly aid you in battle. From a presentation standpoint, the takedowns are really awesome to observe as they are enjoyable and over the top.
Ugly. Disgusting. Stop looking at me.
At the start of a stage, you generally start out with just 2 MP bars. As you defeat enemies and use your soul burst for takedowns, you will increase the maximum amount of MP you have for that level. These takedowns are a great way to recover MP as well, while also using one of your defensive options. You have access to a soul shield. When activated, this will drain your break gauge, but if an enemy hits you when you have this up, you will receive MP back. The trade-off is that the gauge quickly is depleted, and can put the player in a vulnerable state with little to no gauge left. As I mentioned before, your goal is to try and stun the enemy, and if your gauge is gone, then that will put you into the same state, and leave you open to be able to have more damage done to you. Now the soul shield has a really cool effect, where if an enemy is using an attack that is highlighted in purple, you can absorb it through your soul shield, and now you can use it yourself for a limited period of time. This can be really helpful in exploring dungeons or even exposing enemy weaknesses. This is a fun mechanic that adds in an enjoyable element of player skill, where the player is rewarded for reading their enemies, and knowing when to take advantage of their soul shield to benefit their attack string without putting them into a vulnerable position. More advanced players can really take advantage of this, allowing them to pull off more special moves, resulting in stunning more enemies or even making bosses more manageable. For progression, Stranger of Paradise provides an addictive hook. As you gain experience points from defeating enemies, you will level up your classes. Upon each level up, you will receive points that you can slot into different upgrades. Now this is a very set skill tree, and by level 30 you will have all of them. What really makes this part addicting is how the game encourages you to change up your playstyle and how you unlock classes. As you level up the classes you are provided, new classes with their own moves, abilities, and ins and outs are provided to you. For about the first 25 hours you will be unlocking new classes and experimenting with them. What I also like about this is how you can have 2 classes equipped at the same time and switch to them on the fly in combat. This means that mid-combo you can go from a tanky paladin to a more aggressive fist-fighting monk. There's a lot of personalization here, along with each class having its own break gauge. So if you have one class that is low, you can switch to the other one during combat and be at full defensive strength again. Now each class has affinity bonuses associated to it, and this is all dictated by the loot that you equip. Each piece of equipment and weapon provides you with affinity to different classes. Again, this is where more of the customization and personalization comes into play, as you can diversify and have affinities in a few different classes to bank on having some bonuses from each, or you can focus on 1 or 2 and gain some of the more higher level affinity bonuses. This becomes really fun to do in the endgame. As you can see, loot plays a big part in the experience, as it's everywhere from chests from defeated enemies as well. In addition to this are options you have like in a shop, like being able to change or better the special effects of your equipment, along with the endgame allowing for more upgrades and personalization to stat bonuses for your classes as you level up past 30. I felt like Stranger of Paradise did a good job at providing a steady stream of rewards for the player. The minute-to-minute action is really good, and when combined with the rewards, it provides a compelling addiction that makes this hard to put down. The levels themselves are generally fun instances with action, exploration, and a climactic boss fight at the end. Something I really liked about the levels from a visual and presentation standpoint is how they take on elements from other Final Fantasy games. There's a lot of fan service that is blended into the background rather than overtly in your face. So don't be surprised if you're walking through a dungeon and are reminded of other mainline Final Fantasy titles. From a design standpoint, I really enjoyed many of the level gimmicks, as it helped to provide an engaging engaging identity with the new areas that I would explore. For example, in a castle area, you can use a long-range projectile that is trying to hit you as a means to take down barriers to open up other areas. Some have secret walls, others might reward you for stealing a fire ability from an enemy and use it to destroy a grassy wall for a chest. Some are a bit more straightforward, like changing an area from normal to rainy weather to open up paths. Bosses greatly provide a lot of needed variety as they are generally good and very challenging. When it comes to the story, overall I really enjoyed it. The game is generally light on characterization outside of a few key players including Jack. Stranger of Paradise is essentially a prequel to the very first Final Fantasy game, and provides more context and background to the characters in it. Since this is a prequel after the fact, there is some revisionist nature to some of the established characters, and while I would normally not be for this, I was fine with the execution of it here. There are plenty of silly lines and delivery of lines in this as well, and all of this contributes to the entertainment value. My main issue with the narrative is how it's told, in a rather convoluted manner that makes parts of the story more confusing than it should be. On the surface, the story is a good simple tale, but the storytelling could have been improved to make this less confusing in spots. Now, when I first started the game, I thought it was odd how licensed music like Frank Sinatra was used, but the choice of the song was well chosen as it was used well at the end of the game and fits in perfectly.
That's some boat.
Ha ha ha! You've got some stones coming here. For what it's worth, you four don't look like easy pickings.
You're Bikke?
Aye, to some. Captain to you lot.
Now, while I enjoyed my time greatly with Stranger of Paradise, I did have some flaws with it. For one, the game can seem like both a premium AAA game with the gameplay, options, and boss fights, and then at the same time it feels like a budget title. This is really seen when talking to people in town. It's all done through menus, and in some cases they don't even have a conversation. You're just hearing one line. Other flaws I had was that sometimes I would hit the button to be able to use my potion. Jack wouldn't then use it. This can be really frustrating in heated fights, so my solution was to hammer on the button until I could use it again. I don't really know if this is a PS5 issue or if the game has some type of unresponsive nature to using the potion while in the heat of combat. Sometimes the game throws a lot of aggressively grabby enemies at you with no way to break loose, and while playing in solo is a lot of fun, there are some downsides to it. You cannot choose what skills to upgrade for your AI classes, and their classes are restricted compared to what Jack can have. You have limited control of them as you can tell them to go all out, and this is on a cooldown, but that's pretty much it. This is why I preferred to play this game in co-op, as you have more control and could perform more tactics, and your friends have the same options as you when it comes to the classes. There is a set of areas towards the end of the story where the game forces you to play with no allies, and this really shows how the game was not made to be played in this manner, as it can be really frustrating with having all the enemies focused on you. Some of these sections felt cheap and not balanced well, and thankfully they are very short. Something else I wanted to mention for co-op is that you can revive an ally by using both your potions, or the ally can self-revive with one of your 3 Phoenix Downs. But if you are both down and you have Phoenix Downs left, the game will just revert back to a checkpoint. This is a very bad decision. If you have Phoenix Downs, you should be able to use them, even if everyone is down. And lastly, I do think the game should have had more enemy types, as you will be fighting the same enemies a lot throughout the campaign. Now, before we move to the conclusion, I want to show off some of the soundtrack. It's really good with some great battle themes. Here are a few tracks from the game. Stranger of Paradise is a really fun action RPG. It has solid minute-to-minute gameplay, good opportunities for skill, plenty of progression from unlocking new classes and loot. The presentation is mostly good as well, with a few bumps, with the town parts, and the soundtrack is top-notch. While it does have some other issues, the overall experience is very fun, and one that I am enjoying with its endgame content. I think Square Enix marketed this game badly, and it sadly suffered for it. If you're a fan of the recent Final Fantasy titles, you're gonna have a great time with this one. If you're interested in being notified of new videos, please hit the subscribe button and bell. And if you'd like to support the channel and get early access to content, please check out my Patreon. All of the links are at the end of this video and within the description. And thank you very much for watching.